Hi guys, welcome back to the Cool Movie Ratings podcast. So this is the second episode of the Cool Movie Ratings podcast, and today I decided that it would be a podcast because I had such a good time yesterday talking about just random horror movies. So go check out the first episode talking about films like Dawn of the Dead, The Fog, Fright Night, and today we're talking about the best horror directors. So I have 4 horror directors here that I want to talk about their films in depth, and I think it'll be a great episode. So, so let's start off with John Carpenter. Let's get right into it with, honestly, my all-time favorite horror director and most likely my second favorite director of all time. We've got John Carpenter here, who is known for many films. I have not seen most of his movies, and I'm slowly working my way through his filmography, and I've seen 3 movies of his that I want to talk about today. And first one, no doubt everyone, I think, has seen this movie who's been on my channel. We've got the original 1978 Halloween, and the original 1978 Halloween is so awesome because it has the best score of all time in the film, and the music, the whole soundtrack. The theme is probably the best theme of all time, and this was all composed by John Carpenter himself, which not many directors have composed their own films, so John Carpenter gets a lot of props for that. And so Halloween was one of the first slashers ever. It was really known for making the slasher genre exist, and John Carpenter's Halloween was the first horror movie I ever saw, and it means so much to me, so I have to put John Carpenter on the best horror directors list. And so Jamie Lee Curtis is a huge actress now, as we all know, and it is still kind of shocking that her first ever film was this small indie film had a budget of $300,000, which now still I don't even know how, like, Terrifier 2 is made with, like, $200,000 today, which is absolutely insane. I have to see Terrifier 1 and 2, because I've heard absolutely great things. So let me know down below in the comments if you really like Terrifier. And, I do not know how Jamie Lee Curtis has been in all these movies, and her first ever movie was a film that had a budget of $325,000, which is kind of crazy. And John Carpenter created the best horror movie of all time, in my opinion. And I've always loved Halloween because, as I mentioned, it was the first ever horror movie I watched. I watched it, now looking back on it, it was 2 years ago that I first got into this film. And I've never really gotten off the path of watching new horror movies. Like, those are really the only new movies I watch, I feel like, now. And if you look at my channel, like, after 2020 October, like, my channel has been kind of horror focused, and I kind of like that. And horror movies are now, I would say, probably my favorite genre, and I just really enjoy horror. And I don't think this podcast is going to be horror related no, it will be, but, like, it's not going to be solely horror. I'm not calling it CMR's horror podcast. I'm just calling it CMR's podcast because I'm going to be able to talk about random things, like if I want to talk about, like, action movies or comedy movies. And, my friend's in the chat saying Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I've actually heard that's a decent movie, and it's getting a video game, so I think a movie's pretty good to get its own video game. And I know that was directed by the Kyoto brothers, which they've made some other movies. I don't think I've ever seen any of them, but I'm going back to Halloween. It is 2 years. It has stayed my favorite horror film of all time. And I feel like John Carpenter, he created the greatest horror film of all time. And I don't know if I'll ever watch another horror movie that is better than the original Halloween. And it's just so crazy that in 1978, John Carpenter was, I guess he had a career at that point, I would say, because he made Assault on Precinct 13, which at a panel at Monster Mania 51, I heard Nancy Loomis and Charles Cyphers talking about, because I know Nancy Loomis was in the film, and so I'm really interested in that. And that was a success, I think, from a critical point. I think it was also financially successful, because I believe that film had like a budget of like $100,000, which was, it's crazy to think a film could be made with that small amount of money. And I really got to go into the earlier and later career of John Carpenter, because I've only seen 3 films of his, and I'll talk about those other 2. But Halloween, it created Michael Myers, and I don't think John Carpenter or anyone could have guessed how big Michael Myers would have been that many years later, because Michael Myers is one of the most known villains of all time in pop culture and in film history. So it's kind of crazy to think that was all created in a low budget film back in the 70s. But I Halloween is my favorite horror franchise of all time, and Halloween is the only one that was directed by John Carpenter, not the 2018 one or the Rob Zombie remake. The original was directed by John Carpenter, the only other one that feels like a John Carpenter movie. And I feel like if you would have set me, or basically anyone who's seen many Carpenter movies and understands his style, you sat them in front of Halloween 3 and said, this is a Carpenter film, I would have totally believed you, because Halloween 3, you do not get much more Carpenter than that. But that was Tommy Lee Wallace, who honestly I was tempted to put on this list just because of the 1990 It and Halloween 3, but I have to watch his other filmography, like Friday Night 2, which I've only seen half of, which is decent, that I've seen so far. But John Carpenter, I kind of like that Michael doesn't have a motive in this film, because it makes Michael more scary and unknown. And although I love the plot twist that they're siblings, Laurie and Michael are siblings, I know a lot of people hate that, including John Carpenter. I actually really think it's a good plot twist, but I do like motiveless Michael. And yeah, so that was me talking about the first Halloween. But the next film by John Carpenter that I want to mention is The Thing. The Thing is my 4th favorite horror movie of all time, and a lot like the Halloween, it's got a great score. Both Halloween score and the score for The Thing, it's called Humanity. It's a great one. Like, the great score is they are both on my top 10 horror scores of all time. And The Thing, you would think it's scored by John Carpenter, but it's actually scored by Ennio Morricone, who is a composer who's done a lot of stuff, I believe. And I was shocked to learn that it wasn't by Carpenter, because it sounds a lot like a Carpenter score. It's really synthesized, and if you listen to it on YouTube, it's called Humanity. It might be called Humanity Part 2 or something. That's the best score in the movie. It's like kind of like the main theme. And it sounds so Carpenter, but it's a great score. And I think this film has the greatest effects I've ever seen in a film. Like, from the creature standpoint, like Rob Bottin, who I believe he did American Werewolf in London. No, Rick Baker did, now I think about it. But I think those 2 films have the greatest effects of all time. I'm going to mention a film later today talking about the greatest gore effects of all time. But I think the greatest effects, period, is The Thing. Because the scenes where the monster, like, reveals itself, those are some of the scariest and most awesome scenes at the same time. I think the scene that's my absolute favorite in this film is when the blood test and McCready puts the blood of Palmer, I believe. Yeah, Palmer. And it reacts, and the monster reveals itself, and it, like, flies against the ceiling, and it, like, its head explodes and, like, grabs windows, and it's crazy. And it's just absolutely gross, and the grossest effects I've ever seen in a movie, but the most awesome effects for sure. And the fact that I believe this was not even nominated for an Oscar, really proves how much the Academy Awards aren't the way to go on judging a movie. A movie has an Academy Award. Oh, so cool, it has an Academy Award. It really does not matter, because like, they do not honor all movies because there's a lot of things that they don't have a widespread idea of what a good movie is. They think, oh, horror movies, they're bad. Like, I know horror movies are getting some recognition now with films like Get Out, and I know The Exorcist, and even Aliens, which we'll talk about later, um, got an Oscar nomination for Sigourney Weaver. And yeah, so that's my thoughts on the Oscars. And great cast in the thing. I think it has one of the best Carpenter ensembles. There's one film that I'll mention right after this that has the best, but I think Kurt Russell, this was one of his first films in his career after, I think like maybe his first was an Elvis, like a movie called Elvis with John Carpenter that was like, it wasn't a horror movie, it was like a, I think a biography kinda maybe. But and then they made Escape from New York, which I really want to see. And I know they made other movies, but I would say The Thing is the most famous movie for Kurt Russell. I wouldn't. I don't know if I would say it's the most famous for John Carpenter. I would still say Halloween is. And I see the battle between Halloween and The Thing a lot. People asking which one do you like more? They are almost tied for me, but I have to give the edge to the original Halloween, mainly because the score is the best score of all time. I think the score by Ennio Morricone for The Thing is great, but it's nowhere near the Halloween score. But the setting of The Thing is something else that's absolutely great, because Antarctica gives it like a creepy feeling like they can't escape. And I just absolutely love the setting because, like I said, they can't escape, and it's like a cold hellscape that really shows that, I know I said it 3 times already, but they cannot escape, and they're trapped here with The Thing. And I think the scene where I forget Blair like chops up like all the stuff they need to escape, and you think he's the Thing a little bit, but he ends up not being the Thing yet, because he's actually being logical, because he doesn't want the Thing to escape and go and infect the mainland. So that's a really great scenes where at first you might think he's like the Thing and trying to sabotage. He is sabotaging, but it's for an actual logical reason, which is another thing I love about this movie. It's so smart. Like Blair doing that, but the scene that I think is one of the most smart scenes that shows like a character is intelligent in any movie that I've ever seen is when Kurt Russell is talking to the entire group after, I believe, they burned the one guy, I can't think of his name, Fuchs. I think they just burned Fuchs. And he's like, so I know you're not all the Thing, because you would all just attack me right now. So there's some of you are still human also. That's such like an awesome scene because of how smart it is, and I believe John Carpenter, I think Bill Lancaster, if I'm right, wrote the script for this. But such a smart script and such a smart movie, and it really helps you feel for these characters. And honestly, I like how this movie does not give you all the answers. It does not need to give you all the answers, and that's one of the best things about John Carpenter. He does not leave you with a happy ending, and he leaves some up to the viewer's imagination with like the end of Halloween, with Michael escaping, and even he encouraged Tommy Lee Wallace to go with the ending that he wanted, and that for Halloween 3, which ended up being the more downbeat ending, or the more ambiguous ending, I should say. And he does the exact same thing for The Thing. And 40 years later, he has not revealed what happened, and I kind of respect that, because we will wonder forever what happened to McCready and Childs. Is one of them the Thing? And I know there's that one theory where Childs is the Thing because you can't see his breath, but Zach Cherry, great YouTuber by the way, great horror YouTuber, he actually he did a good video talking about who is who, like who is the Thing. Great video. Look up Zach Cherry and watch that video. It's a great video. But he talks about how you can actually see Child's breast, but it's just not as um, obvious as McCready's, because if you look at it, Child is closer to the fire, so if that really doesn't prove anything that he doesn't have a breath. So I thought that was interesting, and yeah. So The Thing is just a great film. I would say it's probably my top 20 favorite films of all time, and it still stands as my fourth favorite horror film of all time. And I got to see both Halloween and The Thing at a double feature at a drive-in recently at Benji's Drive-In, and it was so cool because I hadn't been to Benji's in like 2 years and like 2 months. It was during COVID the last time, like I yeah, during COVID. I could say we're done with COVID now, I would say. And it was during COVID that the last time I went, so it's been a long time. And it was so awesome because both of these films are so great on a giant, giant screen. I've got some cool pictures on my Instagram if you want to go check those out at the Double Digit Director. And I don't really plug my Instagram much, but yeah, I post there regularly about like if I'm doing live streams or videos or that kind of stuff. And yeah, so yeah, that's The Thing. I absolutely love The Thing, and yeah. So the next film I have here from John Carpenter is The Fog. I talked about this on my first episode of the Cool Movie Ratings podcast, and I talked about it for I think like 6 minutes. So I'll keep this pretty brief because people who've watched that first episode already heard most of my thoughts on it. But basically, to sum up my thoughts on The Fog, it is a great 80s. It is 80s, so it's like early 80s horror film, and it was before Friday 13th, so it was not a slasher movie. It is a slasher movie, but it is more of a ghost tale than a slasher movie. It is a ghost tale, and I think it works pretty well because of Blake. I think he's creepy, and all the lepers or something is what they're called, who are coming out of the fog. But probably the best part of this movie is the cast. I think this has one of the best casts in a film I've ever seen because it is John Carpenter's A-list actors, and I just absolutely love John Carpenter. And you've got Jamie Lee Curtis, who I mentioned this yesterday. Why is she marketed as the main character everywhere? Like the poster has her. She's not the main character. She's not even in that much of it. Like she's in a decent amount of the movie, but she's not the main character. And yeah, I think they did that obviously because she was really popular off of Halloween, but um you've got Adrienne Barbeau, who is the main character, I would say, and Stevie Wayne is her name. I couldn't remember last night. And she's in the lighthouse, which is a great setting for her, and she's kind of helping the other group of people like escape the fog and not die, and she like helps her son, like she tells Jamie Lee Curtis and Tom Atkins, who is one of my favorite actors of all time because of Halloween 3. He's just so great, and he's great in this movie too. And Jamie Lee Curtis and Tom Atkins save Adrienne Barbeau's son in the movie, so that part's great. And I really just enjoy The Fog because there's another great score by John Carpenter. Anything John Carpenter, I bet even his movies that aren't that great have great scores by him. And The Fog is another one. I put it at number 7 on my favorite scores of all time, and I really enjoy it. And yeah, another few people who are in the cast is Janet Leigh, who is the main character in Psycho for the first half, who gets stabbed in the shower. I can't think of her name. And she's Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, so that's pretty cool that they get to be in a movie together, two Scream Queens. And then you've got Charles Cyphers, who I also met, or who I met earlier this month at Monster Mania 51. Super cool guy. Him and Nancy Loomis, who was also in this movie, who I also met. They talked about this film at Monster Mania 51. So that night, when we got home, me and my dad watched The Fog, and I absolutely loved it. And the cinematography by Dean Cundey is great, and Dean Cundey does so much great stuff. He stuck with John Carpenter through like the first 3 Halloween movies, and now he did like Jurassic Park and Back Future. So it's so cool that he got his start on the first Halloween, stuck with Carpenter. But The Fog is just an absolutely great horror movie, and that is all I have for John Carpenter, because John Carpenter is the best horror director in my opinion because his style is so great because he can mix horror with a little bit of comedy, and it is just so great to watch his movies, and I will continue to go down his filmography. So let me know down below what your favorite John Carpenter movie is, and which one I should watch, because the only three I've seen are, as mentioned, Halloween, The Thing, and The Fog. I really want to watch Escape from New York, and Big Trouble in Little China, and They Live. I've seen a little bit of They Live. I watched that like 2 years ago. I have to watch the rest of it because I thought it was good. But yeah, that is what I have for John Carpenter. So moving on to the next person I want to talk about. Here, we got a director that I feel like isn't mentioned as much as these are the directors. We've got George A. Romero here. And George A. Romero, he was known for the Of the Dead series and Creepshow. I've never seen Creepshow, so I'm going to be talking about all three of his original Of the Dead films because I've never seen Survival Diary or Land of the Dead yet. I'm interested in them because it's George A. Romero, so I'm very interested actually. But we're going to start off by talking about the original Night of the Living Dead, and Night of the Living Dead is so great because it was such a giant film, like for its time. I'd say because of it, that kind of stuff wasn't on film, like it wasn't in the films yet. Like this was one of the first films with gore, I would say. Like you had like the Hammer films, I guess, and you had uh Psycho, which was really impactful in 1960, but in 1968 you got introduced to zombies by George A. Romero, and George A. Romero, he kind of created the zombie, and it is just so crazy to think it all started with this little low-budget film. So this really proves anything. If you have an idea, a good idea, I should say, follow it. You don't need a giant budget. You just need a good idea, and you need good actors, or you need actors. You don't even need good actors. You don't need to pay for super expensive actors. You just need to have an idea, and you need to be devoted, I would say. And you can see that throughout George A. Romero and John Carpenter's work, honestly. And George A. Romero, he really cares about his movies because he spends so much time editing these movies. You can tell, because I believe he edited all three. I know he edited Dawn of the Dead, but he edited all of these movies, and he got different angles for Dawn of the Dead. I'm already talking about Dawn of the Dead, but I can imagine that this proves that he really cares about his movies, and he is, I wouldn't say underrated, because people talk about him, and may he rest in peace. I should have said that immediately. He died about like 5 years ago, and he is the king of the zombie genre, so may George A. Romero rest in peace. But we've got his three absolutely awesome zombie movies. And Night of the Living Dead, I would say it still stands up, and everyone should watch it at least once in their life, even if you're not a horror fan, because it's not that scary in retrospect. And I think it works great because you've got that social commentary in there, which America really needed at the time. And that's another great thing. George A. Romero can slip social commentary into his movies and not make it like the whole movie, but make it like pretty obvious, and I really respect that. And I really enjoy Ben. He is a great lead, and the ending is so tragic, and it really does say, I agree with James A. Janice, who in the Kill Count Recount for Night of the Living Dead said it really like kind of did, it was social commentary, even though George A. Romero said it wasn't. He didn't intend for it to be. It definitely was in that way. But super tragic ending. But Ben is such a great character, and he's such a likable character. And I wouldn't say that the characters in this movie are all that great besides Ben. You've got Barbara, who is catatonic until she dies, which kind of sucks. And the first scenes with her and her brother are great, I think. They're coming to get you, Barbara, and then him getting brained against the grave was definitely not a kill, but you could see the low budget in that. And I think her brother coming back to kill her is like really sad, but also like whoa, like I guess not cool, but Very interesting, I'll say that. But Night of the Living Dead, it really was the pioneer for zombie movies because there was nothing like it before. And George A. Romero doesn't even use the word zombies besides once in his three original of the Dead series. He used it in Dawn of the Dead. But he thought he was creating a new creature, which I find very interesting that he wasn't even going for zombies. And I just think that the low budget kind of works off and or works out because you've got the black and white movie, which I really don't care if a film's in black and white or not, and I think it works to its advantage, I would say, because it is just pretty cool to see this film in black and white. I know they tried to do like the weird colored version. Like if you go on YouTube, you can find all three of these movies, just high quality copies of these movies on YouTube. And there's like a weird color version, but I always watch just the black and white version if I'm in the mood for it. And the only negative I will say about this film is it is not the most interesting. It is a little bit boring throughout the middle part, but it is still great, and I'd still recommend this movie 100%. I'd give this film a 9 out of 10 because it is a must see for anybody, I would say, because of how great it is with the social commentary and the kills. And the kills aren't that great because it was in black and white and it was like a budget of like $100,000 or less. And I really don't care if kills are good, but you see them improve so much better in Dawn and Day of the Dead. And this film was in 1968, and that was probably one of the things that it was like so shocking from this film, like the gore, because audiences probably hadn't seen that much gore. I'm not really cultured on 60s horror. I'm really only cultured on 70s and onwards horror. So I'm sorry if what I'm saying isn't correct, but I believe that is correct. I've heard. But next up, we're talking about Dawn of the Dead, and I know I talked about this last night on the episode one, but I feel like talking about it even more, and because I got to see it yesterday in the theater at Regal Cinemas, and it's still showing for another few days in 3D. So definitely go and do that because it is awesome. And the 3D doesn't add that much like the Jaws 3D did, but it adds some cool stuff, and it's just totally worth it to go see Dawn of the Dead on the big screen. That's why, main reason why I went and saw it, and it was really cool. So, Dawn of the Dead is honestly the greatest zombie movie in my opinion, and one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And I think it might be better than the entirety of The Walking Dead, because The Walking Dead it goes up and down so much. Like that's the only criticism I have for The Walking Dead. I feel like it like has a strand of like five amazing episodes, and then it dives, and it has like five kind of terrible episodes, and then it goes back up and has five good ones and then bad ones, and it's just a continual thing that I would say happened. I would say what happened like into season three, and it's happened every season since I've watched. That's why I cannot finish the show. So it just bored me, and I've moved on to Breaking Bad, and I didn't go back. But I still think that Dawn of the Dead, even though it's, I would recommend watching the theatrical cut first before you watch any of the other cuts. I've never seen the extended cut, but I'm definitely gonna watch it because you can find the longest cut. You can find all cuts on YouTube. If you look up Dawn of the Dead extended cut, Dawn of the Dead Argento cut, it all comes up. And yeah, so if you didn't know, like the Argento cut, this film was produced by Dario Argento, who I've never seen any of his horror movies, but I'd heard about his stuff like Suspiria. I've heard of that kind of stuff. Suspiria looks really good, and I know Dead Meat James really likes Suspiria. He talks about it decently, so I'll have to watch that. But I've not gone into Italian horror, and Dario Argento provided the budget, I believe, for the film, or he distributed the film in other parts of the world besides America, and he released it under the title Zombie. So if for any if there's any people who are watching who aren't in America, there's a chance you could be watching it. It's called Zombie, and um, I find that interesting, and there's a whole zombie like franchise because I've heard of Zombie, Lucio Fulci's Zombie, but that's actually Zombie 2, so it's a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, but it doesn't have any characters. It's like the Of the Dead series by George A. Romero. It doesn't have any um, relation to Dawn of the Dead, but it was its sequel. So I found that interesting, and I definitely want to watch Zombie because I know CHH from Planet CHH really enjoys that movie, and I really enjoy Planet CHH. He's a great smaller YouTuber, I would say. So definitely go watch his podcasts and stuff. They're great too. And yeah, but Dawn of the Dead is mostly, I would say, mostly known for. I wouldn't say mostly known, but Tom Savini, he's one of the reasons why this movie is very popular because of his effects. I believe this was one of the first films he did. I think he did Romero's Martin, which I've never seen. I've never seen any of Romero's films besides these, the Three of the Deads. And Tom Savini really upped the gore from Night of the Living Dead since it was in color now. And I know everyone complains about the blue zombies. I really don't care. I think they look goofy and kind of work with the more silly tone of this movie, and that's another thing that I see negatives of and my dad doesn't really like about the movie. It's too silly. But I can really appreciate that because it has its points where it's silly, but then it immediately goes back to horror. And like it has stuff like that at the beginning, like the guy's head getting blown apart. That's like one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen still. And George A. Romero is really a master at his craft, and Dawn of the Dead is the perfect zombie movie, and I think everything after that was really inspired by Dawn of the Dead. Like, you've got Shaun of the Dead, which I've never seen, but my dad likes, and I know it's supposed to be a really good comedy movie, so I'd be interested in watching it. But Dawn of the Dead has a great mix of action, comedy, and horror, like I mentioned. I think it mixes all three of them perfectly, and I can really appreciate that George A. Romero didn't want to just make a horror movie, and he also added in the social commentary again about consumerism, which I really did notice. Now that I'm a little bit older, I can understand it because I was like 12 or 11 when I first watched Dawn of the Dead, and now I'm 13, and I can really understand George A. Romero's intentions with this stuff. So that's one of the things that I like as I get older. I can notice that kind of stuff about media. But Dawn of the Dead is a great movie. You've got great characters, and Steven, underrated character. I know he's Flyboy, but I've always really liked Steven. But Peter is one of my favorite characters in any horror movie. He is so cool. He's my favorite character in this movie, period. And then Roger's great too, and Francine is great too. And I like that Francine's not. She doesn't want to be just the den mother. She wants to also have a say and wants to be able to protect herself and the group. I really like that George A. Romero put that in there, and that I can't remember the actress's name right now, but she really clued Romero in on how she wanted to portray her, like not screaming, and yeah, so I thought that was great, and you can tell that every actor really cared about this movie, and I think it still holds up. And I know that Tom Savini does not like the like orange blood, and I kind of think it's a little bit, that might be one of the only dings I have with this movie, because I don't really not like it, but I think it looks kind of cartoonish, but George A. Romero liked it just for that reason, so I thought that was pretty cool. But that it was Dawn of the Dead. Let's move on to Day of the Dead, the third of the Dead series, and I haven't really talked about this one in depth on the channel, so Day of the Dead has the best gore of all time. I know I said the thing had the best effects. That's not what I mean. Like, it has good gore effects, but like the monster effects in the thing are the best. But Dawn of the Dead has the best straight up gore effects with people getting ripped in half. And I think every death in this movie is so disturbing, man. You've got like even the zombie deaths in this are kind of disturbing. Like the one who has all the intestines like disconnected from the doctor, like the crazy doctor. That's just so crazy. And I think the deaths of the grunts are some of the most disturbing scenes I've ever seen. And this was like still is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, because I really do not like body horror in the way of being ripped apart. That stuff freaks me out more than like a psychological movie. Like, for example, this is more scary than The Shining to me, because I really fear a zombie ripping my guts apart. And there's the scenes where, dude, the one guy gets his head ripped off and his vocal cords get ripped back, and his scream gets like more and more um like louder and high pitched because it's stretching out his vocal cords. Dude, that is one of the most disturbing deaths I've ever seen. And that thing traumatized me. I'm not gonna even lie. I wouldn't maybe not say traumatized, but it really freaked me out. But um Tom Savini is a master at his work. He is the best man to ever create visual effects, or not visual effects, special effects. And Greg Nicotero on The Walking Dead, he's up there too. And meeting him in real life and hearing him talk about it was very cool. But I think no one will ever beat Tom Savini for gore effects. Like Rob Bottin and Rick Baker, they got the different kind of effects, but gore effects, Tom Savini, hands down, for just these two of the Dead movies and Friday 13th and Friday 13th the Final Chapter. And Day of the Dead, I think the most disturbing kill in it by far is Captain Rhodes. Captain Rhodes' death in Day of the Dead is some of the most disturbing crap I've ever seen, but also at the same time, in its slightly disturbing way, it is a little bit comedic because he yells, "Choke on it," as they're eating him. But, like, if you look up that scene on YouTube, stuff is brutal, man. And him being ripped apart, like, he gets his, like, legs taken off and then they rip into his stomach. That stuff's gross, man. But I think the best performance in this film by far is by Joe Pilato, rest in peace, who plays Captain Rhodes. His performance is great in this movie because this has potential to be the most unlikable character I've ever seen in a movie. And that's why his death is weirdly comedical, and you're excited when he dies because this monster is finally dead. He straight up like murders one of the doctors for real no reason, and he wants to leave Sarah and the other people behind. And Sarah is played by Laurie Cardale, who does a great job. And it really does show how much Romero like regretted making Barbara like not a very great character, and he like made Fran a little bit better because like she wasn't like a heroine. Now we've got Sarah, who is totally awesome. And yeah. And Day of the Dead, I think I like it a little bit more than Night of the Living Dead. I still don't think it's as great as Dawn of the Dead, but I enjoy Day of the Dead a little bit more because of its more mature and interesting, I would say. That's I think the only thing it gives over Night of the Living Dead is it's more interesting. And I would say that I prefer Day of the Dead over Night of the Living Dead. But all three of these films are great. You can't get much better than watching all these three films in a row, because it really doesn't get much better than all these three films. And I'm excited to watch more of the Dead series from George A. Romero. And I should put this out there. I've seen the remake of Dawn of the Dead. I haven't seen the remake of Night of the Living Dead or Day of the Dead, because I know the Day of the Dead remake is supposed to be god awful, so I don't know if I'll watch that. But the Night of the Living Dead remake was directed by Tom Savini, so that's already got me interested. And I know a lot of people like it a lot, and my dad likes it a lot, so I'm very interested in that. But the Dawn of the Dead remake, my dad and a lot of people prefer the remake over the original, and I just cannot say I do, because I love the original so much, and the new one is too dark. Like, the remake is too dark. It takes out the comedy, like, 100%. There's no comedy in this movie. It's too dark. And, like, the zombie baby, I really think that's too dark and a little bit too far. But I understand how some people could like it with the more dark and not as silly tone. But I really like that about Dawn of the Dead. And George A. Romero, he will always be one of the greatest directors of all, or greatest horror directors of all time, and may he rest in peace, because he gave us the beginning of the zombie genre, which is still going on today with The Walking Dead, and it will continue to go on for as long as the horror genre is around. So may George Romero rest in peace. Okay, so the next director we have here is a director that many people would not say is a horror director. I've got James Cameron here because I want to talk about two of his films that I think make him a horror director for sure. Because we've got The Terminator, which, if you were on the stream last night, you heard me. I was talking about, are these films horror? And I said that Terminator is a horror film, and the next one that I'm going to mention is a horror film. So, for that, I believe he's a horror director, because he has it nailed down pretty well. So, let's talk about the first Terminator first. In this film, you've got the introduction to one of the best characters of all time. Top 3 characters of all time, I would say. Maybe the best character of all time. You've got Sarah Connor. And if you follow my channel, you know that Terminator 2 is my all-time favorite movie. But I absolutely love this first Terminator also. It is not much behind Terminator 2. And Sarah Connor, introduced to her, she's played by Linda Hamilton, who is probably the most underrated actress of all time, because she really wasn't in much besides this, and I really want to watch Children of the Corn. I've heard that it really doesn't stand up, but I believe it'll be pretty good, because Linda Hamilton was in it, so that's good enough for me. And Linda Hamilton is just so great in Terminator 1, because you get to see her transform into such a warrior. And that is one of the things that automatically, by the end of Terminator 1, you're thinking, oh, she's one of the best characters of all time. And she's played so expertly by, as mentioned, Linda Hamilton. And I just really like her transformation, because she's just like she's a waitress, and then by the end she's a complete warrior, and it's just so awesome to see her transformation. And that continues in Terminator 2, and I might go as far to say that her performance is as good in Terminator as it is in T2. But I don't know if it's better than Terminator 2, because she's absolutely awesome in Terminator 2. And, yeah, but another great character you've gotten here is Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn, who is in James Cameron's other work. He always plays a side character, but give this man a leading role in something, because he really deserves it, because he is a great actor. He plays Hicks in Aliens, and he plays, I forget his name in The Abyss. He's a villain in The Abyss. He's really good in The Abyss. And, he's really great in all the side roles he's given, so just give him a leading role in something, because, he's such a great actor, and he is one of the best heroic characters, I've ever seen in a movie, because he sacrifices his life to save Sarah, and it's just a great, absolutely great character, and he is the most likable character in this movie. Well, him and Sarah, and yeah, and I really enjoy that he ends up being John Connor's dad. I thought that was interesting, how it was like that. I was like, whoa, because that's kind of weird, man, because in Terminator Genesis, it shows that it's John Connor that finds Kyle Reese when he's a kid, so that it really is weird if you think about it like that. But, yeah. So, you've got great characters in here, and you've got the performance that turned Arnold into one of the biggest stars of the 80s, if not the biggest. Honestly, I would go as far as to say the biggest star of the 80s, because Arnold Schwarzenegger was such a good actor in this movie. You were so terrified of him in this movie, and it really set his career down a line of films, because after this he got so many movies, because he was in Commando. He was known as the action guy after this movie, but he's a villain in this movie, and he is terrifying in this movie. And although I prefer heroic Arnold, I really do like villain Arnold also, because he does so great in this role, and he's just a crazy madman in this movie, and I can totally see why he got so many roles after this, because he is absolutely so freaking scary in this movie. Because the scene where Sarah Connor's roommate, she's like making a sandwich and he breaks in and he thinks that she's Sarah Connor, and that's like a terrifying scene. And that's why I think this film's a horror movie, because if Arnold had a knife, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Everyone would be like, yeah, that's a horror movie. And it's very slasher-esque with the Terminator hunting down Sarah Connor. It's kind of like Halloween in a way, where Michael's chasing down Laurie, but it's the Terminator chasing down Sarah. And I'm pretty sure this film had a modest budget, I would think, yeah. And the effects, everything besides when Arnold takes out his eye at the end, and he looks up, that looks really fake, but everything else stands up 100%. And they couldn't have done it any better, and it still all stands up. And Stan Winston's puppetry, like with or stop motion, not puppetry, stop motion with the end where the Terminator's coming out of the fire, bro, that's a scary image, but one of the most awesome images in the whole, I would say, in cinema, because I really enjoy how, like, they kind of show the Terminator's unstoppable, because he comes back, like, 19 times after, like, the truck is blown up, and then they're in the factory, and he gets blown up, like, half of his body is gone, and then literally chases down Sarah, and then she finally crushes him in the hydraulic press. You're terminated, effer, and then terminates him. That's like one of the greatest endings ever. And Linda Hamilton again doing an absolutely amazing job. Such an underrated actress. I never hear anyone talking about her besides when they mention like Terminator. She's up there with, I don't know, I would say I like her better than Sigourney Weaver. I'll go as far as say that, because they are the two most awesome actresses who play such great roles, like Ripley and Sarah Connor, but Sarah Connor I would say is even better. And yeah, and it all started with this original Terminator film, which has an amazing score by Brad Fiedel, who I mentioned yesterday also did Fright Night, and his score for this is absolutely amazing. And if you watch my channel, you might have already seen my Terminator cover of the theme. Go and listen to that, because I would say it's more based off of Terminator 2's theme, but it is the best theme I've composed out of the three, or I've composed, but like I've made a cover of, and I think it's great. And I just absolutely love the Terminator. And yeah, so let's move on to the next James Cameron film I want to talk about here, Aliens. So this is weirdly another one that I can understand people talking about the Terminator. Is it a horror movie? And some people say no. The Aliens is so obviously a horror movie to me. And it always has been, because it's freaking aliens going around eating people. That is so horror. And I absolutely love Aliens. And I would say I love it even more than the Terminator, the first one. And James Cameron, I would say, is probably my third favorite director of all time, behind both John Carpenter and Steven Spielberg, because I would say second, because Terminator 2 and Aliens make it better than John Carpenter, but I know he's like not a super great director when it comes to like he yells at his people, he has temper tantrums, so I'll put him at number 3 or number 2. But the films he makes are great, and Aliens is no exception, because you've got the best performance from Sigourney Weaver she's ever given, and it's something that's was actually recognized by the Academy, which is, like a performance is great when it's mentioned by the Academy. So that's great. And I like the cast in this film. You've got Bill Paxton, you've got the awesome and sweet Jeanette Goldstein, who I met at Monster Mania 50, and I met her for Terminator 2, but she's super cool, and I totally recommend meeting her if you can. Then you've got Newt, who is pretty cool, because you get to see Ripley like take care of her on this alien infested place, and It is just a crazy movie, and I think it's better than Alien. I'm a huge fan of Alien. I've thought it was great, and I would say it's one of my favorite horror movies. And that one, no one debates if it's a horror movie. Everyone says it's a horror movie, I feel like. But Aliens, people talk about how it's not specifically a horror movie because of the action aspect. And I was like, yeah, but like, there's a scene, if you've seen Aliens, you know, where the ceiling, like Michael Biehn looks up into the ceiling, who's also great in this movie, Hicks. He looks up into the ceiling and he sees the xenomorphs. They start falling from the ceiling. Like, that's a terrifying scene. Like, 3 people end up dying from that scene. Super scary scene. And that totally makes it horror. And that's one of the scariest scenes. Definitely the scariest scene in this franchise, but one of the scariest scenes in the film. But you've also got Paul Reiser, who's great in this movie, because you've got he is such a great villain, kinda. He's like a human villain, because you tell immediately that something's up with him, but then you're like, maybe he's not that bad, but then he kind of traps them, and then he like almost kills all of them, but he's the one who gets killed. And it's kind of cool that in Stranger Things, the Duffer Brothers casted him, because you think immediately, oh, he's a bad guy, because he always is the bad guy, like he was in Aliens, but then they turned your expectations. He's actually a good guy in Stranger Things. Go watch Stranger Things if you haven't already. Like, come on, everyone's seen Stranger Things. But going back to Aliens, I would say it's my second favorite horror movie of all time, behind the original Halloween. And I can see why some people would not say this is a horror film, because like when you compare it to like films like The Shining and Halloween, it really isn't a horror film. But I think it's like so horrific, and the ways like the people getting attacked when they originally land on L4V2, I think, or something like that, the planet, and that stuff's scary. And one minor thing that I'm just thinking about now, the one negative about this movie is everything starts to happen right when Ripley wakes up. How is it, like, specifically when Ripley wakes up? Like, in 66 years, stuff starts to go wrong on LV42. Yeah, that's the name of the planet. Like, the aliens start like infesting the people like literally right after Ripley wakes up, which is so unlikely with the time. Like, yeah, of course it happened right then. That's a little bit unbelievable, but that's not a negative at all. It really doesn't impact the story. And I still absolutely love this movie. This one was written by James Cameron, or both Terminator and Aliens were written by James Cameron, and he's such a good writer in the way of he makes good characters, and I would say that Aliens is great because they do such a good job with the setting. LV42, like the futuristic side of it is great, and like I love how futuristic this movie looks. It's just kind of mind-boggling because like the guns are super cool, and like yeah, I find that very interesting. And yeah, I love Aliens and the Terminator, and for those 2 films, I know people won't say they're horror. Let me know down below, do you count Aliens and Terminator as horror or not? So, that is my time talking about James Cameron as a director, and I have one final director to talk about here today. And this is one that I almost completely forgot about, and then when I saw it, I was like, oh my god, yeah, I totally have to talk about him. I've got Wes Craven here. And Wes Craven, I'm not gonna lie, not a huge fan of Nightmare on Elm Street, but I'm a fan of the first one. Or like, I'm not a fan of the franchise, but I'm a good fan of the first one. Like, I would say it's at the point where it's in my top 15 favorite horror movies. So I'm gonna talk about that one first. And right off the bat, I want to say that both Nightmare on Elm Street, and I'll talk about Scream in a second, but um they both rejuvenate, or they revived kind of at a point where horror was kind of stale, because Nightmare on Elm Street was when it was just Friday the 13th and Halloween knockoffs. You brought something new to the mix, and then with Scream, it was in the late 90s where those were still kind of fizzling out. They kind of fizzled out, and there was nothing really in the horror genre until Scream came out. And so that's just really great. He had a huge impact on pulp culture because I believe he wrote A Nightmare on Elm Street, I believe, but I don't think he no, Kevin Williamson wrote Scream. But I think A Nightmare on Elm Street has one of the best plots of a film I've ever seen. I think the Freddy Krueger coming into the dreams is such a great idea, and it's a better plot than both Halloween and Friday the 13th. Although I really like Halloween is my favorite horror movie. I think it's better, but this film's way better than the first Friday the 13th. The first Friday the 13th, man, doesn't even compare. Maybe the sixth or fourth one do, but um, I just really prefer A Nightmare on Elm Street over Friday the 13th because there's just something about it. I don't like that kind of slasher boring where it after like in this franchise. The one thing I'll give that I've seen the from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies is they're different. You get a really big variety of movies in this. It's not just one specific like type of movie like Friday the 13th. That is the most rinse and repeat franchise I've ever seen. But A Nightmare on Elm Street gave birth to one of the most known killers and the best slasher killer, or one of, I'll say. Because if you count Jeepers Creepers, or if you count, like, the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers, he's not the best, but he's the scariest. And Freddy Krueger is up there with Michael Myers, honestly. And, because he has the most personality out of any of these slasher killers, because none of them talk, and Robert Englund brings such a mannerism to Freddy Krueger, which I don't think anyone else could bring to it. And I've never seen the remake, but I know Jackie Earle Haley. Everyone agrees that that's no one can do it besides Robert Englund. So I've seen the first three. I actually decently enjoy the first three, and I believe I've seen all these movies at some point. Yeah, I have. And I don't really enjoy anything past three, but New Nightmare and Freddy vs. Jason, they have their moments, and I've seen all of them except the remake. And um, yeah, so another great score here by Charles Bernstein. I don't really hear anyone talk about this score, but I think the 1-2 Freddy's coming for you, that's great. I don't know if that was probably composed by him, but the main theme, the bum 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 boom bum 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 boom. I thought that was great, and it really it's I wouldn't say it's up there with John Carpenter's score for Halloween, but I probably should have included it on the top 10 scores. I kind of forgot about that. And yeah, but I really enjoy the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I think that Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp, who seems like one of the nicest horror actresses ever, um, is great in this. I think that she's on par with Laurie Strode. I would say that because Laurie Strode, I'm not gonna even lie to you. Laurie Strode is my favorite final girl, and I would say that Nancy Thompson's my third, behind someone that you'll hear me talk about very soon. But, like, they're basically, all three of them are on par with each other. And Nancy Thompson's actually smart. She sets up traps, so that gives her huge bonus points. And Heather Langenkamp's performance is great. And I know that Wes Craven wrote the script, like, wrote a little bit of the script for the third film, which really shines through in the end because third film feels like a sequel to the first one, or yeah. And I actually decently enjoy Freddy's Revenge. I believe it's my second favorite in the franchise behind the first one. And or maybe I think I put Dream Warriors ahead of it, but all three of them are great. And Heather Langenkamp does great in the third one, and she's great in New Nightmare. She gives the best performance in this series in New Nightmare, which was directed by Wes Craven. Oh, I just realized I should have put that on this list too, but I guess I can talk about it a little bit. New Nightmare is great too because it's really, I would say that this kind of revived the 90s horror a little bit. It gave something new, I'll say that. It didn't revive it because there wasn't movies trying to copy it, because New Nightmare is really weird in the way of, it's everyone plays themselves. Robert Englund plays himself. Heather Langenkamp plays herself. Wes Craven plays himself. That kind of aspect I find very interesting that they went with that. and they went with like really meta even before Scream. And yeah, so Wes Craven's New Nightmare is great, but I don't think any of them are better than the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And I will say that the original Nightmare on Elm Street was the scariest film I'd ever seen back almost 2 years ago. And yeah, so I always remember the scene where um the Tina's killed. That really freaked me out, and I don't like it. Like when he turns into like snakes, that kind of stuff freaked me out too. But still, the first Nightmare on Elm Street is a great movie. If you haven't seen it, obviously watch it. But the last film we're going to be talking about today is the original Scream from Wes Craven. Now, this is my favorite film from Wes Craven, and this is my favorite slasher film besides Halloween. And I just absolutely love the first Scream. And I actually really enjoy Scream 1 and 2, and Scream 3 and 4, okay. I know those were directed by him also. But we're going to mainly be talking about the first Scream. And I will say, one thing I really enjoy is it's basically the 90s version of Halloween thrown in with meta. Like, it's really meta, and I really enjoy that. Like, Randy, Jamie Kennedy, he was really cool. Like, in the panel in real life I got to see of him at Monster Mania 50. But, he is, like, such a great character, and I'm so glad that he survived till the second one. I really wish he would have survived this whole franchise, man, because he is such a likable character, and, he was a smart character, and, like, everybody's a suspect, that stuff's kind of funny. That's, like, not as realistic. Like, this film's that's not realistic, like, him yelling that in the shop, or in, like, the Blockbuster, but, he's great. And I think we get the second best final girl of all time, Sidney Prescott. She's great in all the Scream movies, maybe except Scream 5, because she's not really in it, and she really shouldn't have been in Scream 5. But Scream 1, 2, and 3 especially, she's great in. And, yeah. And I really enjoyed that all the characters are kind of, I would say, smart. Like, there's a couple scenes where they're dumb, like, Tatum, she sticks her head through the doggy door. That's not a very smart moment, and then she ends up getting killed because of it. That is not, yeah, that's not a very smart scene, but the characters, I would say, are pretty smart, and I think Sydney is the smartest character in this franchise. And every time she gets attacked by Ghostface, you feel that tension and dread. Like, the first time she gets attacked, like, when she gets a phone call, and it ends up being Stu who comes out of the closet and almost stabs her, and it's such a scary scene still, and it really shows how much she's a warrior, because she, like, kicks him and runs away. And the only funny scene that it's like, she calls on the phone, she's like, the like, I think she says, the bimbo doesn't walk out the door, instead she runs up the stairs, and then she runs up the stairs. That stuff's pretty funny and meta. But another character that this film gave birth to, that sounds weird, but another character in this film is Dewey, who is one of the most likable characters in horror, because he's so goofy, and he always gets, like, brutally hurt in these movies. And in Scream 5, it's so shocking because he dies, and you're like, oh my god, no. And in Scream, you get introduced to him. He's not the best he's ever been or ever will be in the first Scream, but he's still pretty great in here. And I'm not a huge fan of Gail, especially in this movie. She's not a very good character in this movie. I do kind of like how she kind of, like, comes and almost saves the day with a gun, and then the safeties on that part kind of sucks. But Gail's not a very good character in this movie, I'll say that. But she gets really great by Scream 2, and she ends up being likable. And in, like, Scream 5, you completely forget that she was kind of a jerk in Scream 1, because she's such a good character in the new ones. I'm excited that she's returning for Scream 6, because I think you could do so much more with Gail, because leave Sydney out of it. I know that Neve Campbell's not returning for Scream 6, because let's let Sydney live her life, and I know Neve Campbell got offered a bad deal, so she didn't take it. So I'm glad it's just Gail, because there's so much more to do. But yeah. And also, this film's got one of the best plot twists, because I actually did guess the two killers, and I was correct. And I really don't care because it was still like, whoa, I was right. And also, Stu and Billy are two of the greatest killers of all time. In this in horror. That sounded kind of bad too. The greatest killers of all time in horror movies, and I think that uh Skeet Ulrich's acting is especially great because he's serious. I would say Matthew Lillard does great because he's so goofy, and you could tell in real life he's such a cool dude because in real life at the Q&A I went to, he was absolutely awesome. I'm definitely meeting Matthew Lillard the next time he goes to a convention because I he seems like such a nice person. And yeah, so um Billy and Stu are great, and Stu's comedical acting I actually really like and think is hilarious. Every time I watch Scream, you hit me with the phone, like that stuff. That stuff's hilarious, man. And I always get a laugh. That always gets a laugh out of me every time I watch Scream. And this is definitely it's like close to being in my top five um, horror films of all time. And I just really enjoy the meta aspect, and I really enjoy how it's a lot like Halloween, but for the 90s, which works very well in my opinion. And I think that Scream as a franchise is great, and it was all directed by Wes Craven until he sadly passed away in 2015. Rest in peace, Wes Craven. He made some of the greatest horror films of all time, in Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. And I really enjoy Scream too. And I think that Timothy Olyphant in that movie is great. And even though he like isn't in the movie a lot, he is a great killer in the way of his acting is not over the top, but it's great. And I would really like Mrs. Loomis and Scream 2, Billy's mother. I thought that was very interesting that they went the route of my God, Friday the 13th. They took influence from that. I forgot for a second. So, yeah. So, Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street are two of the greatest, horror movies. I like Scream more, but, Nightmare on Elm Street is great also. And, yeah, that's really all I have to say for the best horror directors. Let me know. Maybe I'll do a part two if I, get some more horror directors on this list. If I do, I know I want to include Tommy Lee Wallace for Halloween 3 and It. And yeah, let me know down below any other great horror directors. If any of the movies talked about today are great. And right before we go, I still want to say, may George A. Romero and Wes Craven rest in peace, because they are two of the greatest horror directors of all time, and their legacy will live on in these films. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching the Cool Movie Ratings episode 2 podcast about best horror directors. Let me know what you guys want episode 3 to be about. I'm currently writing some ideas, and I think it might be about horror conventions, who knows. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this Cool Movie Ratings video, not video. I'm so used to saying that. Now we've got a podcast. Cool Movie Ratings podcast, and I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.